Author is funded by the Pacific Northwest Writers Association, supporting writers from pen to publication since 1955. To learn more about the PNWA and their yearly conference, please go to pnwa.org. Hi, this is Bill Kenower for Author Magazine, and I'm here at Town Hall in Seattle, Washington with Joe Sacco, author of The Great War. Joe, welcome to Author.
Thanks very much. Glad to be here.
So Joe, I know that your sort of creative journey, you're known now, of course, as an illustrator or as a narrative illustrator, but you began as a journalist. That was your first creative drive, wasn't it? A written journalist, just a traditional journalist.
Well, that's what I studied. I wanted to be a hard news reporter, but it didn't really pan out that way. I mean, most of the jobs I got that were related to journalism weren't in the least bit interesting to me. So I sort of fell back on comics, which was something I'd been doing since I was a kid anyway.
But that's very interesting because hard news and comics seem very far apart.
Right. I didn't see one relating to the other, to be honest. My first comics were funny or satirical, mostly satirical. But then I began experimenting with the form. I told the story of my mother in World War II. In the comics form, I toured with a rock band and sort of did the story of what it was like to be with this rock band, and I was taking notes, what they were saying, that whole thing. So I was doing a lot of different kinds of things, and eventually I sort of fell into the journalistic comics.
So you were doing this journalistic comics. Did you have trouble finding people who were open to that? Because it's brand new, it's interesting, but it's not really been done. Did you find people who were interested in that, or was that a difficult journey?
Well, it was strange because I didn't really know what I was doing, and when people asked me what I was doing, I had a hard time explaining it because I hadn't actually I hadn't actually done it yet.
Right.
And I was very unsure of myself and unsure of how it would all work out. So I would sort of hem and haw and just say I'm doing a journalistic project. But later I began to find out that when people found out I was doing comics or illustrations, it didn't turn them off. So much so that later on, many years later, when I returned to the Middle East to do a second book, I brought my first book with me to show to people, because I realized that was a really good entree. They opened the book and they understood exactly what I was trying to do.
Right. And
then they began to understand why I was asking them questions that relate to the visual aspect of a scene they might have seen. And you know, they sort of got it. Now, I always thought if I had brought a book that was written in prose and gave it to someone who didn't speak English, it would have been meaningless to them.
That's right.
But drawings are universal.
That's right, they're like music.
Yeah, exactly. You get it right away.
Okay, but now you've got an unusual book out,
right?
And a somewhat unattended to subject when you consider all the wars and all the things that have happened in the 20th century. And now you're addressing the First World War. So how did this project come about? It was the suggestion of an editor, wasn't it?
Yeah, he wasn't my editor at the time. His name is Matt Weiland, and we were roommates in New York City. He was an editor at a different press at the time. And it was one of those drunken evenings. We were just hanging out, and he was interested in the First World War, and I had been since I was a kid, and we were just talking about it. And he was taken with a book by a guy named Matteo Pericoli, which was a fold-out accordion-style book called Manhattan Unfurled, the Manhattan skyline. And Matt told me, wouldn't it be great if you drew the Western Front, like in a big panorama? And you know, 15 years goes by, he becomes an editor at W.W. Norton, and he calls me up and he says, do you want to do this?
And so you chose the first day of the Battle of the Somme.
It epitomizes something to me.
And what does it epitomize?
Well, I mean, you can talk a lot about the horror of World War I. We all sort of know that. And there are other battles that were equally as devastating. But this is one particular day which was such a catastrophe. It was the biggest loss of life the British Army ever experienced. I mean, in one day, 57,000 casualties, almost half of everyone who was in the attack, and 20,000, 21,000 died on that day or as a result of wounds. 10,000 in the first hour.
Did you have to go into a kind of zone with that to keep bringing the originality to it with each new person, each new person, each new person?
In some way, that's true. I mean, I was interested in the mass because to me, what's interesting about this, it was a mass human endeavor that ends catastrophically. But as you're drawing them, you realize, okay, you can't just say, this is a mass. A mass is made up of many individuals.
Yeah.
And you realize everyone's experience is different. I've read enough books about the battle and of course about World War I, and you realize there are some soldiers that are very gung-ho, some who are very scared, some who are a combination of both, and you have to think about that as you're drawing them. Different individuals, different experiences. When you look at it from a distance, it all looks like a wash of humanity. When you look up close, you see there's different things going on.
Do you enjoy the detail work? Does that excite you as an artist, or is it just necessary?
I don't know if I think it's more necessary. I don't know if it excites me, but at some point, even doing detail is a form of limitation. It's just what comes out of your hand. It's just how I draw. And it comes from my journalistic background. When I'm trying to, draw an image of a refugee camp or a town, let's say in Bosnia, it has to be that town. It's not any town, it's that town. So detail really matters to me, and it just sort of carried over into this more artistic project.
And you also had to have a narrative. It reads as one gigantic image, but it's not a static image. It's in fact a progression of time.
Right. You just take the natural inclination of people in the West, or they look at something from left to right.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea is I follow sort of the Bayeux tapestry and how that plays out. You just go from the beginning. You start at one end and just you take the reader through time, with the build-up, the soldiers marching in, going into the trenches, going over the top, the battle, and then wounded soldiers coming back through the trenches as others are still pressing forward, and you take the wounded to the casualty clearing stations, and then into the grave. So
what did you learn writing this that you think you'll bring to your next book?
Well, I actually wanted to think of humanity as a whole rather than, most of my journalism is about individuals in a bigger scene. In this case, I wanted to think of humanity as a whole, and I think my further work will be, my next series of things I think is going to look at humanity as a bigger picture, wondering about the species as opposed to the individual or even a political situation.
Sometimes just entering energetically this is what artists can do, whether it's written artist or visual artist, enter energetically the idea that would create that environment gives you some glimpse into, just like an actor or writer would, gives you a glimpse into it. Intellectually, you maybe can't achieve.
I think that's really true. I sometimes relate drawing to acting because when you're acting, I've always thought you have to inhabit something. Yes. You have to inhabit a person. And the exact same thing is true when you're drawing. It's hard to draw because you actually have to think of what that person is thinking, especially if you're showing their face.
Yeah.
And you have to sort of be inside it.
You have to feel it, right?
You do. And sometimes when you're drawing their body, you think, oh, one shoulder's up, so that means the other one goes down. You think of that and you sort of involuntarily move your body to mimic that.
So I have one more question for you. And so just finish this sentence for me. If my work, my comics, the creation of my comics has taught me anything, it's taught me what?
Oh boy, I don't know how to answer that one. What has my comics taught me? It's my means, I'm not sure. It's given me a way of looking at the world. It's sort of like journalism. It gives you an excuse to talk to people and to go into their homes, and it is my means of getting into people's lives. It's my means of exploring all these issues. So it's just given me it's given me everything in this way. Every intellectual idea I have sort of is seen through the prism of my work, I think.